It all started the day I decided to move back into my old cabin, the place I had built with my own two hands long before there was any neighborhood association nearby. The cabin sat just outside the HOA's official boundary, but you'd never know it by the way the self-appointed queen of the subdivision, a woman everyone called Karen, acted when she saw me unloading my truck. She stormed over, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp, and with a voice that could cut glass, demanded to know what I thought I was doing on her land. I couldn't help but laugh, because the truth was simple. This cabin wasn't part of her HOA, never had been, and never would be. But Karen didn't care about property lines or legal boundaries. In her mind, anything she could see from her porch was automatically under her control. She told me that if I didn't pack up and leave, she'd take matters into her own hands. The way she said it made me wonder just how far she was willing to go. Neighbors began peeking out from behind their blinds, curious about the shouting match at the edge of the woods. Some looked sympathetic, others just shook their heads like they'd seen this show before. I tried to stay calm, reminding Karen that the cabin was mine long before her HOA ever existed. But she refused to hear it, pointing at me like I was some trespasser squatting where I didn't belong. That was only the beginning. Little did I know, moving back into that cabin was about to spark a battle between freedom and control, history and entitlement. And when Karen pushed her fight even further, I realized this was no ordinary neighbor dispute. It was a showdown waiting to explode. The cabin held more than just walls and a roof. It was a piece of my past. Years ago, I spent countless weekends out here clearing the land, cutting the timber, and building a place that felt like home. Back then, there was nothing but trees, dirt roads, and the sound of crickets at night. The HOA didn't even exist. But when the developers came in and started carving up the land for their planned community, everything changed. They built neat little houses, paved driveways, and suddenly there were rules about paint colors, mailbox styles, and even how tall your grass could grow. My cabin sat just outside their reach, but apparently, that didn't stop Karen from trying to claim it as her territory. Word spread fast through the neighborhood that I was back. Some neighbors came by quietly to welcome me, saying they missed seeing smoke from the chimney and hearing life on this side of the woods. Others avoided me completely, maybe afraid of crossing Karen. It was clear she had her grip on the HOA, and people were used to following her orders. Still, a few whispered that she'd been itching for a fight ever since she got elected president of the board. I noticed little things the first few nights back. A car would idle at the end of the dirt path longer than it should. Motion lights flickered on outside when no one was there. I even found a paper tucked under my cabin door. No name, just a warning written in block letters telling me I didn't belong. The more I settled in, the more obvious it became. Karen wasn't going to let this go. She believed the cabin, my cabin, was a threat to her perfect world. And she was already making her next move. Karen's next move came faster than I expected. A few mornings after I settled in, I woke to the sound of voices outside. Peeking through the curtain, I saw her standing at the edge of my drive with two men from the HOA board. She had her arms crossed tight, pointing at the cabin like it was some kind of eyesore ruining her carefully manicured neighborhood. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught phrases like property value, non-compliance, and safety hazard. None of it made sense. This wasn't even their jurisdiction. Still, the way she carried herself, you'd think she owned the forest itself. When I stepped outside, she turned to me with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. She announced that the HOA had concerns about my cabin and would be monitoring the situation closely. I reminded her again, calmly, that my land was not part of her community. But her reply was chilling. That's what you think. It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was quiet, calculated, like she already had a plan. Meanwhile, the neighbors were split. One man from down the road, a retired veteran, stopped by to offer help. He said Karen had run people out before, folks who couldn't fight back against her pressure. On the other hand, a younger couple I spoke with seemed nervous, even talking to me, like siding with me might put a target on their backs. At night, the tension grew heavier. I'd hear footsteps crunching in the leaves just out of sight, then silence when I grabbed a flashlight. Tools I left outside seemed moved or misplaced. though I couldn't prove it. It felt less like a disagreement over land and more like a war of nerves. Karen wasn't just determined, she was obsessed. And every day, the lines between my freedom and her control grew thinner. The pressure reached a breaking point one evening when I returned from town to find a bright orange notice nailed to my cabin door. It looked official at first glance, stamped with the HOA's logo, declaring that the property was out of compliance and subject to immediate removal. My stomach sank, not because I believed they had power here, but because it showed just how far Karen was willing to push her authority. She wasn't just trying to intimidate me anymore. She was trying to create a paper trail, something she could wave in front of anyone who questioned her. That night, the woods didn't feel quiet like they used to. I could sense eyes on me, shadows shifting just beyond the tree-line. Every creak of the porch boards, every snap of a twig made me wonder if Karen, or one of her loyal board members, was watching, waiting for me to slip up. Even the neighbors who had once nodded at me now kept their distance, their blinds drawn tighter than before. The retired veteran who had offered support came by with a warning. He said Karen had called an emergency HOA meeting, and although my cabin wasn't technically their business, she was planning to rally the entire neighborhood against me. "She wants you gone, no matter what it takes," he said quietly, his eyes darting toward the road like someone might be listening. As the days passed, small acts of harassment escalated. My driveway was blocked by strange cars, trash appeared scattered across my yard, and the warning notes grew more aggressive. It was clear Karen was tightening her grip, preparing for a final push to drive me out. The air felt charged, like a storm was building. I knew the confrontation I had been dreading was no longer a question of if, it was a matter of when. Just when I thought Karen couldn't push things any further, the real shock came. One afternoon, I arrived back at the cabin to find a county truck parked out front. A man in a uniform stood with a clipboard, walking the perimeter of my land like he was inspecting it. When I asked what was going on, he explained that a complaint had been filed about unauthorized construction and unsafe living conditions. My heart sank as he read off the details. Karen had managed to involve local authorities. Somehow, she had twisted the story, so it sounded like I was squatting on land that wasn't mine, or worse, breaking the law. I showed him the deed, explained the history of the cabin, and pointed out the property line that clearly kept me outside the HOA. He nodded, said he understood, but his words carried a warning. "She's persistent. I've seen this before. Don't expect her to stop here." That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just relying on intimidation. She was using every channel she could to make my life miserable. The neighbors felt the shift too. Whispers spread about petitions being passed around, about secret meetings where my name came up more than once. Even those who didn't seem loyal to Karen were suddenly afraid of speaking to me. It was as if she had turned the entire HOA into a weapon, and I was the target. Late that night, I caught sight of something that froze me in place. Through the trees, I saw flashlights moving in the dark, slowly circling the cabin. They weren't law enforcement. There were no sirens, no uniforms. Just a quiet group of figures, watching, waiting. Whatever Karen was planning, it was no longer just about paperwork. The real fight was about to begin. I stood on the porch as the flashlights drew closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. It wasn't law enforcement. It was Karen and a handful of her most loyal board members. They stopped just short of the clearing, their lights cutting across the trees, making the cabin glow like a stage. Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp and certain, declaring that I was trespassing on community land and that they had come to remove me. I took a breath and held my ground. This time I was ready. From my pocket, I pulled out the folder I had carried since moving back, the original deed, maps, and even a signed letter from the county surveyor. I laid it all out on the porch rail and shined my own flashlight across it. "This is my land," I said firmly, my voice steady. "It always has been, and nothing you do will change that." For a moment, there was silence. Even Karen's supporters shifted uncomfortably, the certainty draining from their faces as they realized her authority didn't stretch this far. One of the men muttered that they wanted no part of this and backed away. Soon, the group thinned until it was just Karen, glaring at me with a mix of fury and disbelief. But just as I thought it was over, the real twist came. From the shadows, the retired veteran neighbor stepped forward, not with support, but with papers of his own. He revealed he had quietly purchased a narrow strip of land years ago, land that bordered my cabin and technically touched HOA boundaries. With a grim smile, he explained that Karen had convinced him to side with her. Suddenly, the lines weren't as clear as I thought. I had won the battle with Karen, but the war for my cabin was far from finished. The veteran's reveal hit me like a punch. For a moment, it felt like the ground beneath my cabin wasn't as steady as I thought. But as he laid out his claim, the truth came into focus. His narrow strip of land wasn't enough to swallow up my cabin or push me under the HOA. It only brushed against the property line, a technicality Karen had twisted into a weapon. Once the county was involved again, the paperwork showed what I had known all along. My cabin stood firm on my own ground, untouchable by HOA rules or Karen's schemes. When the officials closed the case, Karen's influence started to crumble. Neighbors who had once been silent began to speak up, tired of her constant power plays. A few even apologized for keeping their distance, admitting they were scared of being her next target. As for the veteran, he eventually admitted that Karen had pressured him into helping her, promising favors and support within the HOA. Once she lost her grip, he backed down, leaving me with nothing more than an uneasy handshake and a reminder that trust can be fragile. The cabin itself became more than just a home again. It turned into a symbol of standing your ground when someone tries to control what isn't theirs. Every time I sat on the porch watching the sun sink through the trees, I remembered why I came back here in the first place. Freedom, peace, and the right to live without someone else's rules. Karen never fully disappeared, but without her power over the HOA, she was just another neighbor with an opinion. And as for me, I learned that sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought with fists or force. They're won with patience, truth, and the courage to hold onto what's yours.